creepy stormy night. It was a dangerously stormy night, and everyone in my family was doing their own thing. I was in my room, wrapped up in a cozy blanket, watching TV. My parents were in the living room, sharing laughs while watching some comedy show, and my sister was upstairs, engrossed in her video games. I usually enjoyed stormy nights like this. They made me feel relaxed, the sound of rain against the window providing a soothing backdrop. But my tranquility was shattered and a monstrous bang echoed through my room, coming from the window. I jumped up and looked outside. The rain poured down heavily, obscuring the face of the person standing there. He started pounding at my window, his screams for help barely audible over the storm. I cautiously opened the window just a crack, and he screamed, "Help me, I'm hurt." The rain made it hard to communicate, and I shouted for him to go around to the front of the house. I quickly shut the window and dashed to the living room to inform my dad about the distressed man outside. As I reached the living room, my heart raced. My dad was about to open the front door, but I stopped him, voicing my concerns. I wasn't sure if it was safe. Just then, the phone rang, and the caller ID displayed our next-door neighbor's name. My dad answered, and I heard him exclaim, "No way." Something was definitely wrong. He hung up the phone and instructed us all to stay away from the door, but he didn't explain why. Instead, he cautiously approached a window to peer outside. It was then that he saw a man crouched on the front stoop, pounding on our door while clutching a large, sharp tool. My dad yelled through the door, warning the man to leave before the police arrived. He then called the cops, his voice tense with urgency. Outside, the man seemed to give up and disappeared into the stormy night. When my dad later spoke to our neighbor, he learned that the man had been seen rummaging through the neighbor's shed and had emerged with a large chopping axe. The cops eventually found the crazed man wandering the streets, and the harrowing incident made headlines in the newspaper a few days later. The night. My grandpa recently told me a story that took place on his farm, nestled 2 hours away from our home. He lived there with his wife, Mary Ann, whom he'd married 15 years ago. Every morning, Mary Ann would take their small Boston Terrier named Sherry for a walk, and in the evenings, it was my grandpa's turn. One tranquil evening, as the sun began its descent, my grandpa strolled along their familiar dirt path that ran alongside the woods. Sherry, his loyal companion, trotted alongside him. As they ambled along, they encountered a fellow traveler on the trail. Sherry, like most dogs, instinctively barked and tugged at her leash in response to the stranger's presence. My grandpa offered a friendly greeting, but the stranger, cloaked in a large hood, walked past without acknowledging them. Puzzled but undeterred, my grandpa and Sherry continued their walk. However, Sherry's behavior grew increasingly erratic. She kept glancing back and barking, clearly agitated. My grandpa tried to quiet her and urged her forward, but her persistent barking was unsettling. Eventually, my grandpa decided to turn around, wondering what had set Sherry off. To his shock, he spotted the same hooded stranger lurking behind a tree at a short distance. Instinctively, my grandpa quickened his pace, despite his age, and reached into his coat pocket, where he always carried a canister of pepper spray, just in case. Suddenly, the forest floor crackled with the sound of approaching footsteps, and before my grandpa could react, a gloved hand clamped over his mouth and nose. He struggled to breathe, to scream, but the intruder's grip was relentless. Sherry, sensing her owner's distress, valiantly bit and barked at the assailant, which seemed to loosen his hold slightly. Summoning all his strength, my grandpa wrestled the pepper spray from his pocket and unleashed a relentless spray of it. The attacker, overwhelmed by the stinging chemical, finally released his grip and began to scream in pain. My grandpa wasted no time. He staggered away, gasping for air, as he made a desperate dash back to his house. Sherry's barks and her brave intervention had undoubtedly saved him. Miraculously, my grandpa emerged from this harrowing encounter physically unscathed, but the memory of that evening's chilling ordeal would forever linger in his heart. Growing up in California, I couldn't help but feel a newfound respect for my grandpa's resilience and the unwavering loyalty of his steadfast companion, Sherry. A childhood mystery. One night, when I was just a young kid, I found myself engrossed in my favorite cartoon in the living room. The TV volume was cranked up pretty high, as per my usual routine. However, amidst the animated chaos on screen, I distinctly thought I heard my mom's voice calling my name from downstairs. Startled, I called back, but there was no response. I assumed she couldn't hear me over the TV's noise. Moments later, her voice reached me again, unmistakably calling my name. Intrigued and a little worried, I decided to venture down to the basement. As I descended, the lights were off, and I nervously called for my mom once more. Silence greeted me. Puzzled, I couldn't fathom where she might be calling me from in the darkness below. Nonetheless, one thing became clear: she wasn't in the basement. With a growing sense of unease, I began the ascent back up the stairs. Before I could even reach the top step, I was jolted by the sound of my mom's voice emanating from the depths of the basement once again, urgently calling my name. I peered down into the pitch-black void below, fear coursing through my veins. Panicked, I raced back to the top step, flicked on the lights, and cautiously descended halfway, squinting into the basement's shadows. To my relief and terror, I found no trace of my mom down there. Overwhelmed with horror, I sprinted upstairs, practically in tears, and desperately called out for my mom. She rushed down from the upper floor, and I tearfully recounted the bizarre experience of hearing her call me from the basement. She reassured me that she hadn't been calling me and went down to the basement to investigate, attempting to calm my frayed nerves. However, despite her efforts, I couldn't shake the profound sense of dread and conviction that something in the basement had imitated my mom's voice. Although I was just a child at the time, I remained steadfast in my belief that I heard what I heard that eerie night.